Welcome everyone to our fourth and final episode in an unmissable webinar series presented by Shippit, in which we'll be exploring the top retailer questions, concerns, and hot topics throughout the month of February with a revolving panel of retail leaders. Today's session is Sustainability Unveiled, the Power of ESG Reporting. My name is Rosalie, I'm the editor here at Power Retail and your moderator for today. I'd like to welcome to today's panel Alice Kuepper, Head of Sustainable Business and Corporate Social Responsibility from Winning Group, and Rob Hango-Zada, Joint CEO and Co-founder at Shippit. I'll get you two to introduce yourselves and your roles in just a second, but before we do kick off, just some housekeeping. To our viewers, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please pop any questions into the question section on your screen, just as they come up, and we'll get to those at the end, time permitting. Let's get underway. Alice, could you please introduce yourself and your role? Thanks.
Thanks, Rosalie. Thanks for having me. Lovely to be here today. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, and it's a real pleasure. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful land that I'm broadcasting to you from today, and pay my respects to their elders present and emerging. So my name is Alice Kuepper, and I'm the Head of Sustainable Business and CSR at the Winning Group. Been there for 3.5 years and in charge of really implementing and driving all of our sustainability and also our charity initiatives.
Fantastic. And Rob?
Hi everyone, Rob Hango-Zada, co-founder, joint CEO of Shippit. So thank you for having me on again for our fourth and final webinar. So my job is to lead the business, particularly across the Australia-New Zealand region, having co-founded the business with Will almost 9 years ago now. He's off in Singapore, expanding our business across Asia, but sustainability is quite a topic I'm quite passionate about. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking the topic with everyone today, and also demystify why a shipping technology platform is talking about sustainability as well.
Perfect. I imagine you both have heaps to talk about today, so let's kick off. Decarbonisation is possibly the most daunting task in retail, but it is also one of the most important. As industry grapples with this monumental talk, we're also witnessing a glaring spotlight on ESG practices. In this context, transparency is becoming paramount. So, Rob, you mentioned sustainability is a pretty central focus for Shippit. Could you delve into that a bit for us?
Yeah, look, at Shippit, we realised probably about 6 years ago that we had fallen into a fairly big obligation, and that was the fact that we power millions of deliveries every single year, and we've got a lot of data on our platform, and we facilitate e-commerce. And with that in mind, we see our own role in that is to make sure that we connect people and goods in the leanest way possible. That's our kind of vision and mission at Shippit, and our big, hairy, audacious goal is to power 200 million deliveries without waste by the end of 2025. So without waste is a little bit of a kind of unmeetable goal, but it's a little bit like the Towards Zero campaigns, where we wanted to elevate the role of waste that exists within the logistics industry. Supply chains and logistics are all about efficiency, and efficiency naturally results in waste reduction, and waste ultimately sits in the kind of camp of wasted hours, wasted kilometres, and therefore wasted carbon emissions that are emitted to the atmosphere. The unintended or difficult to avoid consequence of the e-commerce boom that we witnessed sort of through COVID and beyond is that, we are seeing quite a significant rise in deliveries and demand for online retailing. And with that, every parcel has a carbon impact on the atmosphere, and that's something that we couldn't ignore. And every parcel that goes out has an irreversible impact on our environment. So as the market continues to grow, so too will the waste that's inherent. So we saw it as a really important step for us to intervene, given our position. We sit in the middle of retailers and carriers, and also the shopper or the consumer ultimately. And with that power comes a great responsibility for us to almost shine a light on where inefficiencies exist, but also leverage our technology to make sure we can bring supply chains closer together, pool collective resources across industry, and actually lead the narrative with the industry. And that's something that we've been embarking on the last few years, and something I'm pretty excited to talk about.
Well, Alice, where does sustainability sit within Winning Group's broader strategy?
So sustainability is really at the core of Winning Group's 10-year transformation strategy. So a couple of years ago, our company mission was updated to creating the best experiences in the world for our customers, our people, our communities, and the planet. So with that, we really want to use our business and ecosystem as a force for good, and therefore sustainability sits very central to the group strategy. And that includes all of our group functions and the businesses that are included in our group. So Appliances Online, Winning Appliances, but also Winning Services, our logistics and 3PL business. And so in the last 3 years, we've really embedded a lot of those sustainability initiatives into our corporations, with a particular focus on ethical supply chain initiatives. So a lot around our modern slavery, risk identification and mitigation, and also waste and recycling. And look, I mean, we've done a lot in the last 3 years, there's some things that we're really proud of, but we totally recognize that we still have a long way to go, because this is a really long roadmap for us as a business, but also for the entire industry.
Well, speaking of that roadmap, last year Winning Group published the Sustainability Progress Report outlining those environmental, community, responsible sourcing and education and awareness initiatives you've got going on. What were the key themes that you're working with in that report?
Yeah, so as you said, this was our inaugural Sustainability Progress Report, and it was a voluntary report for us. And we covered our progress across the key 4 areas that we focus on in our strategy, which is environment, responsible sourcing, awareness and education, and community. And so within the environment area, pillar of the strategy, we provided an update on like the removal and recycling program that we launched 2 years ago. So we're pretty well known for our program on removal and recycling of appliances, but then in the last 2 years we expanded that program, and are now also removing and facilitating the recycling of all the packaging waste that comes with the products that we sell. So, large cardboard boxes, a lot of soft plastic, and the polystyrene, which is a real issue because there's no curbside solution for that for customers in Australia. We gave a lot of stats and data around how much recycling we have actually achieved. So over 23,000 tonnes of scrap metal we've recycled in those 2 years, over 3,000 tonnes of packaging waste. And I think for us, it was really an opportunity to communicate also those foundations that we've laid over the 2 years in terms of implementing processes and data capture systems, so that we can then actually provide those updates with data behind it. So and we, there was other initiatives, of course, that we took to within community. We took to our partnerships with Good 360 Australia, Dignity Homeless Services. We gave an update on our modern slavery action plan and our implementation of the responsible sourcing roadmap. We took to our reconciliation action plan, and we also took to those some of those customer-facing initiatives that we implemented. So, for example, an efficiency row on Appliances Online that we launched, and also a campaign which we call the Maintain campaign, where we help customers understand how to look after their products 3 months after purchase.
Awesome. Well, we can't talk about reporting without mentioning mandatory reporting that the government's set to enforce soon, specifically that Scope 3 emissions piece. Rob, how should retailers prepare for these obligations, especially considering the complexities of supply chains in the industry?
Yeah, so look, it's we kind of cast our mind back over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of doom and gloom. A lot of consulting firms are coming out of the woodwork saying ESG is coming, get ready, get ready. And, we tried to demystify that a little bit. There was a consultation paper that came out, probably within the last 12 months, which outlines some of the key reporting standards that Australian companies will need to or may need to comply with based on what the Treasury Department had kind of put forward. And as we started to understand that a lot more, we start to talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. And so more specifically, from July 1, it will be mandatory to start reporting on these emissions. And as we sort of break these things down, if you're not familiar with them, scope 1 and scope 2 is what you're really in direct control of, which are related to your business operations. Scope 1 are self-generated emissions, and scope 2 are things that you purchase, like power, right? So scope 3 is the interesting one because it's related to any third-party operation that touches your business or surrounds your business. So these are the indirect emissions that your business will be generating. And for a retailer, that's things like, courier emissions when they're delivering goods to their shoppers and the like. So from what we understand, from July 1, retail businesses, not all of them, but initially there'll be a few because it's a bit of a staged rollout, will start to need to report on their scope 3 emissions. Now, that will probably come a little bit later for the mainstream masses, but this is something which the industry hasn't really got a great handle on. And we're starting to see a little bit of panic from the industry around that. And candidly, it's really about having the right preparation. And I'll unpack a little bit of why this is such a hard thing to measure in a moment. But a lot of retailers are starting to get more aware as to what would be required from them in terms of reporting, but not necessarily how to implement the right level of reporting to establish a good baseline and start to put programs in place to reduce them. Forward-thinking retailers like Winning obviously have a pretty good head start here, but when the regulations come in, it's going to push the stragglers who are sort of sitting behind the timeline and not necessarily knowing how to take action. We're going to think about this as an FY25 problem and beyond, and something that a lot of retailers should start getting their head around, particularly around the scope 3 piece, because the government has started to make very clear that their commitment to climate action is real, and there will be repercussions in the future. So there is a little bit of kind of truth to what the consultants are saying, not just a way to drum up revenue to drive compliance reporting. But we've got to think more than just what the government sort of imposed measurement means, and think about more sustainable business practices as a whole. But we think it starts with reliable reporting, so you at least have a baseline to know what your emissions look like.
And what's your take on this, Alice? Both with regards to the importance of that legislation, but also how retailers can prepare themselves, how winning groups are preparing themselves particularly.
Yeah. It's a game changer. It really is a complete game changer because it marks that transition from voluntary to mandatory disclosures of ESG risks and opportunities, and that link to financial performance of a business. So for us, we did in our inaugural sustainability report also communicate our scope 1 and 2 emissions. As part of our sustainability journey, we did a carbon footprint assessment, baselining our 2020 carbon data, and we, scope 1 and 2 is pretty easy to do, really, because as Rob said, it's really the emissions that you're in control of. Scope 3 is a lot more difficult, and so we estimated our scope 3 emissions, but because scope 3 emissions are what's called the value chain emissions, there's a lot of different data that flows into that, and it's not that easy to really get a grasp on that, which is also why the proposed legislation gives companies a bit of time to report on those scope 3 emissions. So for those organizations that are going to be captured in that group 1, which is FY25, they don't need to report on scope 1 and scope 3, just scope 1 and 2 in the first year. Now, in terms of, I guess, what businesses really need to do and how they might be able to prepare. So businesses really need to understand now what their risks are from climate change and who owns this at a board and executive level. What are your targets and what strategies are you going to put in place to mitigate those risks, and how are you going to govern that? So that's the core of what we know that the reporting will require. So yeah, it's around understanding the risks, communicating metrics and targets, putting governance in place. So probably be good step one would be to get familiar with those requirements. So the ISSB or the AASB reporting framework, getting familiar with that and really understanding what are the requirements for your organization, because as we said, there's different groups based around size and turnover, and not every organization is required to report in year one, but now's the time to get prepared for that. So really assessing your capabilities and capacities within the organization to prepare and to meet those proposed requirements. So what people do you have in your organization, and what is the capacity, and what do you maybe have to outsource? And then really starting to identify your climate risks and discussing them at an executive and a board level. Potentially run a workshop with your executives and start to discuss those risks and opportunities as well. You could set up a working group, a cross-functional climate working group, and then start to put those governance processes and structures in place, and really review also what metrics and targets you have, and then look at your roadmap. I think that also just on that scope 3 piece, it's really important to understand that partnerships and collaborations are going to be key to tackling scope 3 emissions. So a really good place to start now as well is to see what partnerships are there, or what forums are there that you could join or get a part of to join these conversations, because scope 3 emissions are a pretty big piece, and they're shared with all the different players within your network. And also, I'll say lastly, the Australian Institute of Company Directors has published a really good guide for directors on the mandatory reporting requirements and how directors should prepare. So that's also a good place to read up on it.
Well, Rob, with all these difficulties, how can retailers navigate that path of ESG reporting, ensuring transparency, but also prevent those pitfalls of greenwashing? How do they work that balance there?
That's a great question. And I think like everything Alice talked to is about, real proactive engagement around a very important topic. And I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight that whilst this is a compliance burden, it's a fantastic opportunity to engage with your customer and do the right thing for the environment. The reality is there's been so many unsustainable practices, and I don't know if you've ever walked down a supermarket aisle and seen all these packaged goods that have so much packaging within them, and there's zero accountability throughout that supply chain. Nobody is kind of being penalized for the pollutants of single-use plastics and all those sorts of things. And so, this is a real opportunity to establish a competitive advantage, and to also engage with your customer. We've seen a massive rise in B Corps. We've seen a lot of, brands getting on the front foot around a lot of ESG matters. And I think it's really important, but customers are going to start holding brands accountable as well if we don't act, and we don't act with integrity. So we need to look at how we tackle this head on. So getting educated is one of the most important thing, and then communicating loudly and proudly all the great things that you can do. Unfortunately, because there is a lot of consumer demand for more sustainable practice and greener brands, there's been a fair amount of greenwashing in the market where historically we haven't had enough scrutiny of the data that's being put out there. And it's really important that you check who you're partnering with. If you're running a carbon offset program, do they have legitimate projects? Is it real? Can you be communicating what you're communicating? Because some of this is really just based on pure ignorance or naivety of business because it's such a new thing. So educating yourself as much as possible and scrutinizing is going to be important, because the ACCC will crack down on greenwashing. So it's important to kind of speak from truth there. But we kind of encourage, transparent communication and also a commitment to reducing. So setting goals, as Alice said, is a really important thing, and being loud and proud about those goals. But making sure, more importantly, you actually have an action plan to address them. Like I mentioned earlier, Shippit plays a pretty unique role here, and what we're doing is a couple of things. So, we've got initiatives that we're working on around how do we neutralize the carbon of delivery through sort of greener, sustainable options. The other piece is how do we actually just drive visibility, and how do we help validate the measurement of kind of this type of data, because all this will really benefit decarbonising operations, and that ultimately is a good thing for consumers because they'll vote with their feet. Yeah, look, there is the potential to get it very wrong, so it's important to get ahead of it to get it very right, and that sets the example to the industry, and we need to lead the industry on this thing.
I imagine with this will come a whole new mass of data, and understanding that and unraveling that, it must be very complex. So I was wondering, are there any specific technologies or platforms that retail businesses can really leverage to streamline and get ahead of this?
Yeah, I think as Alice kind of talked about, there's this value chain reporting, and because it's not your asset, you're not directly responsible for it, you have a reliance and dependence on the ecosystem to share the data with you so that you know what's going on. And the difficulties don't start and stop there. Usually within the ecosystem, there's a lot of shared infrastructure. So whose carbon emission is it is probably the first question to answer. And I'll give you a good example of that. So, we know emissions are closely related to kilometres travelled on the road. Now, imagine you've got two next door neighbours, Alice and Rosie, you guys live next door to each other. You've both ordered a parcel from two different retailers, but they've arrived on the same truck. Who takes carriage of that carbon emission? Is it retailer A, retailer B? Is it Alice's fault? Is it Rose's fault? And how do you apportion the emissions appropriately so that you can actually trace that back as a baseline? So that's kind of the intricacies of the network. And so a lot of that comes with really understanding the data and defining a methodology that's accepted so that it becomes a standardized approach. Because if two retailers are going about measuring that delivery in very different ways, it's not going to sit right in terms of the impact that you can have. And that's realistically the problem that we're trying to solve here. We have a great amount of data that's aggregated, anonymized, but it's used across, parcel movements from a turn-by-turn route optimization perspective. It's understanding the movements within particular networks and trying to build proxies around how you map different delivery journeys. So that's really where our focus is, but our job is to really support retailers through that. There is a difficulty in getting that data if you don't have a platform like Shippit to be able to get that visibility. So you've got to ask a lot of questions and favors of your third parties to kind of share data. And not a lot of companies are actually prepared to share their data in the same way, because not all of it will be good news, but we need to start somewhere. We need to build a baseline first. So what we've done is we've partnered with a third-party group, Penguin Associates, who are very well versed in the regulatory space, and they understand, the role of technology in doing all this stuff. And we've been able to build a carbon calculator. And that takes all the data from the deliveries booked through our platform, which allows us to understand movements through networks based on a set methodology and to provide a very simple report back to our customers so that they don't have to do anything new. They don't have to pay a consulting firm a lot of money. They can just work with a platform that has their data in hand and can share that back quite easily. But we're also looking at how we share data, but also look at what we can do right now. And that is making sure we've got the right carbon offset partner. So a lot of what we do around our kind of, our partnered rate program is we actually offset all the carbon emissions from current deliveries anyway. So that's something that we've seen as an opportunity a few years ago to kind of stake our claim in the ground. And then the next step is providing that visibility so that retailers can baseline, and then starting to partner with retailers and carriers on programs that we can reduce emissions with.
You mentioned in the past route optimization. What do you mean by that? How does that play into this?
Yeah, so as part of our product suite, we have a driver management fleet optimization product called Nowgo by Premonition. And really, route optimization comes down to the algorithms that make fleets a lot more efficient and effective. So if you think about the number of turns that you take, how many left turns, how many right turns should you take, where should you optimally park so that you can nail the delivery sequencing and all those sorts of things. This not only increases speed and reliability, but it also reduces the amount of kilometers traveled per parcel. And so, you know, we've when an order is placed online, based on how we route deliveries and how we run those optimizations, you're making sure you've got the best possible throughput through a fleet that you can. So the next step then is really about how you take existing assets, make them more efficient, but actually change those assets into assets which are a little bit more sustainable as well. It becomes EVs and all those sorts of things. The interesting tidbit I'll share with you, though, is based on the data we see on our platform at a macro level, 15% of all deliveries in Australia originate within 15 kilometres of the customer purchasing. However, the average parcel travels around 722 kilometres to get to the customer's doorstep. And that for us was a bit mind-blowing. As we see the rise of local commerce over the next 5 to 10 years, we want to bridge that gap, but a lot of that relies on data and connectivity of systems to bridge that gap. And one thing that I'm quite proud of is, through the Premonition app, at least, we've been able to save around 2 million kilometres of travel for vans on the road today. And that's just through optimizing the existing fleets that exist out on the road. So, that statistic of 722 kilometres, that's what we've got to attack now.
Absolutely. I've got one last question for you, Alice. Considering that diverse landscape of retail, how can smaller emerging retailers who might not have the same resources as these industry giants, how can they strategically position themselves in the market through their sustainability efforts?
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, just to echo, I guess, what Rob said around authenticity, backing up whatever you communicate with data. I mean, that is really the core of what you need to do. So don't make sustainability claims that you can't back. The ACCC and your customers will be onto you very quickly. But further to that, I think it's about really understanding your unique strengths and your category and do that really well. So if you are a retailer that is in control of your own manufacturing, really focus on the materials and the production of your products and see what you can do there. And then leverage partnerships and collaborations for the other elements. So, for example, partner with a logistics company that can help you reduce your transport emissions and your packaging waste impacts, because this is so complex and it's almost impossible to tackle all these different impact areas yourself. So I think really focus on the low-hanging fruit first, and make a real effort there. Collect your data so that you can communicate with confidence. And seek out partnerships for other elements.
Fantastic. Well, some awesome insights today. I'd love to keep going. I personally could talk about this all day. Sustainability is such a passion of mine, so important. Thank you so much for your insights today. Some really fantastic ones there. To our audience, thank you so much for coming along. You can find all 4 of these episodes uploaded on our site shortly. If you do have any questions, sorry we didn't get to them today, but please send them on to me and I can put you in contact with our lovely panelists today. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Rosa. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.